Thank you. Thanks for always waking me up to recording. This is mint. These are several mint plants that I have in my garden. I've thrown a few leaves in my cup tonight, and it is a delicious and refreshing beverage. I think we should call this the sip session, which is a nice way to relax. It's also, we're sheltering in place for the very first time. This is a directive. It's not guidance. It's actually a directive for those of us that live in the Bay Area. I think 8 counties now are under order to shelter in place and to practice the social distancing that we have been advised about to really combat the flow and spread of the pandemic. This was a very interesting piece from Sanjay Gupta on the news last night. A lot of people said that they had never seen Dr. Gupta so emphatic or riled up, that he's usually a pretty easygoing guy, but he got on the news last night and made sure everyone knew. I appreciated his sentiment because he said, stay home and don't spread the virus. How I behave affects your health. How you behave affects my health. Never have we been so dependent, really never we've been so interdependent on each other, at least not in my lifetime, and we should rise to that occasion. So the values that we spoke about earlier in the semester about mutual respect become really self-evident at this time, and I hope everyone is taking this seriously and practicing really good personal, social, mental, and physical hygiene. So tonight we're going to continue to experiment with this exciting learning platform that we've been thrust onto, Zoom. Zoom is different than meeting in the auditorium or getting together with the speaker down in front afterwards. Zoom really works best as what I think of as a peer-to-peer learning platform. So we are going to try to use more of the functions tonight. If you would do so, I would really appreciate it if you keep your video on, especially when we do the breakout sessions. We want everybody participating in the breakout. Those are going to be small groups of 3 and 4 people. It'll really be an opportunity for you to connect and enjoy the company of others, and also maybe learn something from one another and share something with one another. So you can keep your audio on mute, your video on. We're also going to try to use the chat feature throughout the evening. Our teaching assistants are going to monitor chat and answer questions, and I'm going to do my best to navigate the chat as well when I can see it on the screen. You know, it's good to have a plan. We had a plan for this semester, and it's also good to be, why don't you fill in the blank and send in your thoughts on chat. I'm going to open the chat now and take a look at what you are suggesting the right answer to this question is. It's good to have a plan. And this is both and thinking, and it's good. It's good to be well-fed. It's good to be flexible, compassionate, positive. These are great. Open-minded, ready, alive, pliable, flexible, understanding, here, now, positive, adaptive. Those are all great. Open, thinking outside the box, willing to adapt, persistent.
Sucking it out of my ear slowly.
Well, you know what I would say? What do you think I would say? Grateful, flexible, grounded, grounded, grounded. I would say it's good to be bamboo. Anybody being bamboo this week besides me? Yep. Okay, onward. Tonight we have a really special guest host who's going to be joining us in a moment, Sophie Egan, a dear friend, colleague, former student, now a really accomplished author and thought leader in the world of food. She's going to come on in a few minutes and take over the reins of the course and bring you three really thoughtful, interesting people who are doing a lot to expand transparency in the food system. But let's just talk a little bit about this moment of systematic shocks that we're all experiencing. I wanted to do a quick poll to see how everyone was doing. The first question is going to be, how are you holding up? And the second question is, how are you doing food-wise? So let me launch the poll now, and please send us your answers. How are you holding up? And how are you doing food-wise? Just answer the one that seems like the best answer to you. You might feel like you want to say yes to many of them, but unfortunately Zoom doesn't let us do that yet as a feature. It's good. I've got about half of you registering, and I will share the poll shortly after we get almost all the answers in. I've got about 75% contributing, a few more coming in. Okay, it looks good. I'm going to share the results with you just so you can see. I'm not quite sure how you see that on your screen, but it looks like half the people are hanging in there, 15% feeling grounded, about 17% feeling overwhelmed, about a quarter feeling anxious. Just a few people, thankfully, are feeling a little bit of panic, and a couple people are feeling surreal. So that is not uncommon right now. And I'm so glad to hear that food-wise, for the most part, most of you are doing okay. That is really good to hear. And I think we will check in on that maybe almost every week we get together. A couple of you are worried about how you're going to eat and might need a little help getting food. I wanted to remind those of you that might need help that the basic needs service on campus is still functioning and open. The information for it is in our syllabus, and Fiona can actually share it again tomorrow if anyone wants. Also, if you need help figuring out how and what to cook, be sure to come back on our April 1st class, because we're going to focus on culinary literacy that day. So thank you for participating in the poll, and I will close that up now and take us back to the systems dance. This is kind of our orientation to learning about systems and developing our food systems intelligence. I wanted to highlight a couple of Dana Meadows' directions here. Make feedback policies for feedback systems. So social distancing is certainly a dimension of a feedback loop in this system, and seems to be the only kind of intervention right now that works meaningfully from an evidence base to slow the spread of the contagion. Go for the good of the whole. That's what we're trying to do in this class. That's what we're trying to do at Berkeley and throughout our community. We all need to take a long view right now. There's a lot of short-term tension and uncertainty, but if we can expand our thought horizons and our time horizons and our boundary of caring, we're going to be okay. And most importantly, we're going to hold fast to the goal of goodness, the collective goodness. So we're experiencing quite a few interventions in the system right now, and I wanted to just share my reflection from this week. I know we assigned you a reflection that was to encourage you to go visit a garden and write about your experience. If you're not able to do that because you are sheltered in place, or you're not able to go out in your backyard or walk around the block or get there, it's still okay to be outside as long as you're staying 6 feet away from people. Getting a breath of fresh air is very good for you. But my reflection really was to think about these scenes in the supermarket. And these were sent to me by my daughter Lily in Chicago. And it got me thinking about that word consumer again. And as you know, that's not one of my favorite words. The notion of being a consumer drives this desire for transaction, for taking, perhaps hoarding. And I was thinking about, I've proposed other words to you. I've proposed eater, I've proposed citizen, but I'd like to share another word. What if we were all thought of as cooperators? Imagine the store treating us as cooperators. Imagine the food companies or the toilet paper companies treating us as cooperators, or each of us treating each other as cooperators. You'd be in line at the store and you'd see that you'd got 16 pizzas in your basket and the person behind you didn't have any, and you might feel compelled to cooperate and might share what you have. So tonight we're going to again embrace these mindsets that have been serving us well. The vocation of the gardener I will invoke again, the vocation of care. We're thinking a lot about revaluation. Certainly this pandemic is going to set in motion a huge revaluation. For those of you that have been paying attention to the news today, probably the hardest hit industry is the beloved restaurant industry and all the people that work in it. And that is going to cause extraordinary ripples through our culture, our economy, our friendships. And to follow revaluation as a mindset, I just wanted to suggest regeneration. It's my pleasure now to introduce you to Sophie Egan, who's going to lead the rest of the class, and also invite you into a couple of opportunities to interact, especially later in a breakout session, where again, I'll remind you about the using your video. I wanted to just celebrate the publication of Sophie's book, which I think just is happening this week or last. She is pivoting or vividing pretty quickly herself. She was supposed to take off tomorrow on about a 40-city book tour in live and in person, and that's now going to become a radio tour from her desktop. So we're going to wish her well. This is Sophie's second book. She's also a frequent contributor to the New York Times Well column and a number of other publications. She's a 2015 graduate of the Masters of Public Health program at the University of California, Berkeley. You've heard of that. I had the pleasure of working with her when she was a student, and since then, when she's been a program manager and a real thought leader at the Culinary Institute of America, particularly running programs like Menus of Change and the Menus of Change Research Collaborative. I'm really thrilled that she's here today. She's really knowledgeable, and she's done a lot of work to get this book together. She's generously shared with you the introduction to this book as a PDF, which we posted to B courses. I hope you've had a chance to take a look at that. I'm going to turn it over to Sophie now and let her continue the class and then introduce her special guests. Welcome, Sophie.
Thank you so much, Will. It is an incredible honor and privilege to be co-hosting this evening's class. Can you hear me all right? Great. Well, thank you for the generous introduction. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Oops. All right. All right, should be all set. So this is the plan for this evening. First I just want to say as Will said, this is a vivid for all of us, but I'm really enjoying the fact that I can see all of your faces. Actually, live presenting is a little bit different live classes when we're all facing the front. And as Will said, this is really a much more of a peer learning environment. So I'm just really excited about this format. And I really do encourage you to use the chat to make this as interactive as possible. So we are also really eager to make tonight as relevant as possible. So the plan for tonight, I'm really going to focus on the topic that we had in store for you, which is this conscious eating revolution, unpacking transparency in an era of eroding trust. I'll share a bit about the book, a bit about transparency and traceability, but also really focus on the here and now and meet all of you where you're at with the coronavirus and what I'm thinking of as corona conscious eating. What does it mean to be a conscious eater now and into the future, and how might that have changed or be something that will change over time? We have an absolutely phenomenal panel, as Will mentioned, so I look forward to their presentations. And then please stay with us for the end, where we will, as Will mentioned, we'll break you into the small groups for the breakout session. And that's really going to be a chance to understand from all of you what the challenges are that you're facing as you're feeding yourselves, kind of dig into that poll a bit more with some perhaps stress eating, some just finding where you're going to access food, cook food perhaps, but then also, as I also started to see in the chat, unearth some solutions. What are some great online cooking resources, podcasts? What are other strategies that you're finding solace and comfort and nourishment from? So briefly, thank you for the introduction, Will. I wanted to share that critically, in addition to the background that I have prior to my current role, where I'm leading a consulting practice called Full Table Solutions that's really trying to be a catalyst for food systems transformation. And as Will mentioned, that my previous work with the CIA, really leading nationwide movements to make menus healthier and better for the environment. But it was only possible because of my time at Berkeley. I am a proud alum, and I just wanted to really share, it was through that eye-opening experience, really, to me, the enlightened eating experience in my food identity formation that occurred during grad school for me, that I hope is occurring for so many of you. And I also just wanted to mention, I'm wearing my Berkeley blue in solidarity, because I do want you to know I'm in Seattle here geographically, but I'm there in Berkeley in spirit and mind, and with all of you sheltering in place. And it's such an incredibly special community Berkeley is, both the campus and the surrounding area. So we will get through this, and I do say we because I'm there from afar. So how to be a conscious eater? I really offer in the book the notion that being a conscious eater is defined as making food choices that are good for you, others, and the planet. And I offer this three-part framework as sort of a mental checklist, a way to align your values with your food purchases. You've heard throughout the class about voting with your vote, voting with your fork, and also about complexity. And so to me, this is both holistic and comprehensive, but also memorable. We're going to dig into a little bit more about what this could mean for you, but I'll offer sort of three specific ways that conscious eating and transparency can be defined in the context of this class. So the first is, and actually, sorry, just to back up for a moment, is that when I say those three, good for you is the whole you. It could be nutrition and beyond, and I'll share some more kind of sub definitions of that. But others is, to me, is all the people and animals affected from farm to fork, as we say. And then good for the planet is a little bit more self-explanatory. But so through these three lenses, you can really think of them as a set of apertures, that when everything is ideal and in perfect circumstances, when you're making a food choice, deciding, am I going to buy this or am I going to buy that? Maybe you're stocking up online, maybe you have limited choice and so forth, but you're still evaluating in real time, every day, many times a day. In a perfect world, all three of those boxes are checked. But often we can fall into tunnel vision and just look through the lens of animal welfare, or only through the lens of my own personalized nutrition. And often that can lead us awry, but it's going to be in the alignment of those apertures, those lenses, that the real magic happens over time. And so when I think of the three ways that we can really think of conscious eating in the context of everything you've been learning throughout this class, I know you had Carla Vernon speak about the concept of a company's triple bottom line, right? People, planet, profit. I would offer that this checklist is kind of like a personal triple bottom line. It's a way of really saying, this is what I stand for. And you have to spend some time for yourself throughout this class and beyond as you're taking in new information, really determining what are your values that you want to express through your food choices. And then really where transparency and traceability come in is that being a conscious eater fundamentally is a commitment to greater awareness. It's a commitment actually to complicate your food choices. The opposite of transparency is opacity, right? So many interesting analogies to transparency. You can think of looking under the hood, shedding light, bringing out of darkness, right? Pulling the curtain back, perhaps taking a microscope, examining under a closer lens. And I really like Saru Jayaraman, a professor at food policy there at Cal, her term behind the kitchen door. This is both literal and figurative. And this is, these three books are sort of examples of ways to really delve more deeply into what it means to look under the hood, to seek that the people, the circumstances, the conditions, the processes, and the facts that sometimes are inconvenient or sometimes are under the status quo, are left in hiding for pernicious reasons. And as a conscious eater, we have a commitment. You decide that you have a commitment to rejecting opacity. And in the case of Behind the Kitchen Door, this is really about restaurant workers. This is more relevant than ever today, I would say, with the lack of sick leave that many restaurant workers experience, issues of wage theft, all kinds of other subhuman treatment occurring, unfortunately, throughout the labor practices in some restaurants. And so the Restaurant Opportunity Center actually offers some solutions, high road restaurants. Okay, as a conscious eater, I can find out what those are. I can use this app and find that out. Another Berkeley professor, Dr. Seth Holmes, has a book, Fresh Fruit, Broken Bodies. This looks at the conditions of migrant farm workers. The hands that feed us is very a phenomenal report from the Food Chain Workers Alliance, that's very related to that as well. And then third example, in terms of transparency and traceability as well, which is really this, where does our food come from, and how was it produced, and by whom, and in what ways, and what were the production practices. Real food, fake food. Larry Olmsted provides a pretty alarming portrait of the prevalence of food fraud. And this occurs actually quite a bit in the seafood industry, basically selling food as something other than it actually is. And Parmesan and all kinds of adulteration of premium products and selling them at higher margins. So I encourage you to check those out, but I really just wanted to share that, you know, this conscious eating framework is a way to simplify, but it's also a desire for greater amounts of information, which inherently means holding greater complexity. And then third, I offer that conscious eating is a mindset. You've heard a lot from Will about mindsets, tool sets, and skill sets. And I really think it's a mindset that I just described, applied through a series of tool sets and through the lifelong practice of a skill set. And I'll give you some examples of what I mean by that. So when the mindset is really that intention that as an eater, as a cooperator, as a diner, whatever you want to identify as, it's that you care. It's that you care enough to align your food choices with your values. Maybe not every single food choice you ever make for the entirety of your life, but generally speaking, you have it as your compass. And it can be everything from, you know, these sub values underneath the good for you, good for others, good for the planet, Could take the form of, as I mentioned, animal welfare, social justice, all types of things. In this moment, I'm thinking a lot about how good for you is really, providing comfort food, nostalgia, right? What also is helping our immune systems? What is making us, our bodies feel good, providing nourishment? What is boosting our mood, giving us energy, and so forth? You may also, in the bigger scheme of things, have religious beliefs or cultural traditions or dietary restrictions and so forth that may come into play with good for you. Good for others. I talked a little bit about farm worker rights, restaurant workers, workers in general, but there are other aspects at play, right? I mentioned animal welfare as well, but also thinking about topics like power structures in restaurant kitchens. Perhaps you wish to address, capital flow for female food entrepreneurs and support women-run businesses, or perhaps you want your food choices to support LGBTQ-run businesses, or local sourcing, regional sourcing, right? And then of course, good for the planet, and that's everything from natural resources to waste streams to organic and regenerative practices, carbon footprint, water footprint, and beyond, right? But it is also, I suggest, applied through a series of tool sets in the sense that collectively there are frameworks, systems, shorthands out there created by government, created by NGOs, created by third-party organizations or industry to enable us together to act, to eat consciously. And what I mean by that is, in your municipality, do you have curbside composting? Can you help divert waste from landfill? How does that make it easier or more difficult to act upon the value that you care about? Are there, as I mentioned, third-party certifications, but even the FDA ingredients lists, nutrition facts panels. These things are in place there so that it's not merely about you and your individual values, but that there are systems and structures in place. And then third is really this lifelong practice. I don't think any of us will ever fully master it, because what occurs is that new information always is coming forward. And that's really what our panelists are going to speak about, is how there's greater granularity in terms of information available, different types of demands that become available, and also you in your own life, really have to think about running information through your own filters of what your values are. So I just encourage you to think about it as something that you practice, a skill of also that media literacy that you learned about from Civil Eats, where you're discerning fact from fiction, evidence-based guidance, and versus dogma, for instance, and so that you can really discern quality information to feel really grounded in the choices that you're making. And then finally, I just want to venture that your values are going to ebb and flow and evolve over time. Right now, this moment, I think a lot of us are trying to find out which of our food values are essential and which sort of fall by the wayside, right? Perhaps personal well-being is taking higher priority than it did before. Is reusability something? Maybe you were bringing your mesh bags to the grocery store and now you're thinking, I'm just going to use the single-use plastic ones because it seems safer, right? It seems like sort of a risk to go the bring your own route. Or maybe you are, on the flip side, actually finding that you're being even more mindful in your eating. Saw some comments in the chat about stress eating, and perhaps the hand washing is prompting you to take greater gratitude, have a moment to really sit and appreciate the food that's coming to you. Maybe we're wasting less. I don't know the answers, and this is what we really want to unearth from you during the breakout. But the point there is that this will evolve over time, and coronavirus won't be the last time that your values are tested. You'll have life circumstances, maybe you'll have a family or move cities and so forth. But my hope is that this general framework, good for you, others on the planet, can really be a compass, as I mentioned, but also an inner anchor that provides some stability amid really rapidly changing tides. So with that, I'm very pleased to turn it to our panel to look at how they see this notion of transparency, unpacking that a bit more from their vantage points, and also hear a little bit from them on their thoughts about how conscious eating may even evolve and how that may affect their work. So first we have Lam Lee, who is a senior analyst at the Center for Good Food Purchasing. And I will stop share so that she can go ahead and tell you all about what they're doing there and her background. She is also an alum of the Haas School of Business, so very excited to have her back. Over to you, Lam.
Thank you. It's pretty incredible to be back. And speaking of feeling surreal, it's pretty surreal right now for me, given that I wasn't very far away from where you guys are right now as a student and taking Haas classes at Anderson Auditorium. And so yeah, it's a lot of feelings right now that's welling up for me. I really appreciate being here, and I want to thank Sophie for inviting me, and Professor, of course, and your team for making this online learning space available. I know that it must have been really tough to figure Zoom out. My team has trouble figuring Zoom out all the time, so it's definitely a challenge. So last weekend, I rewatched Hassan Minhaj's closing episode for 2019 on the Patriot Act. And I thought that what he said about how to survive 2020 couldn't be truer. And he said to survive 2020, we should all try to close a few mental tabs. And as I say this, I realize that this might be very true for some of you who have like 50 tabs open on your internet browser of all the things that you care about and want to do in the upcoming weeks. But it might not be a bad idea to close some of those, tabs down and focus on what's really important right now, which is to keep yourself safe, act responsibly for your sake and for others, and find things of enjoyment that will take you through this really difficult time. And I want to spend the next few minutes to talk to you about my work, the work that I have been working on since graduation, in the hopes that I will be able to send some positive energy and give you the sense that we're all in this together and we're all pivoting as needed to deal with this difficult time, and that you can be sure that we're all working very hard to keep the good fight going. And with that, I'm going to start sharing my screen. Give me just one moment here while I set things up. Okay. Let me know if you can see my screen. I don't know if this is, can you see my screen?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. Okay, so I was born and raised in Vietnam, and when I moved here to the US, I was actually enrolled in a public school. First day of school, you can imagine I was very nervous about a bunch of different things, but there was one thing that I was really looking forward to, and it was lunchtime. Because in my experience, lunch meant things like purple yam soup and braised chicken and ginger sauce and a healthy portion of vegetables and tropical fruit. In case you don't know what that is, that's a dragon fruit. And I do apologize for this collection of Google pictures. I didn't realize I would need a picture of my lunch 15 years down the line, but you get the idea. It was a delicious and satisfying lunch every time. So I was really hoping my American lunch to be something of the same quality, except this was closer to what I actually got. Some tater tots, hamburger, chocolate milk, pretty typical of an American school lunch, and a questionable dessert that was also pretty typical. So I did not return to the lunch line, needless to say. I started packing lunch for the rest of the school year. And my 13-year-old self concluded that one of two things must be true. One, public schools just don't have the funds to purchase high quality foods. Either that or they don't have the time to look for high quality foods. It turns out, and of course it turns out this way, I was wrong for the most part. In fact, every year, institutions like school districts, city agencies, and hospitals spend billions of dollars on food purchases and months at a time looking at contracts to find the food items that they need. The institutional food service contract industry represents $120 billion, serving some of our nation's most vulnerable population. And the federal government alone spends $21 billion on programs like summer meals, school meals, and supplemental food programs. Now that's a lot of money and an incredible opportunity for our founders ask 2 questions. 1, shouldn't public institutions who are funded by taxpayers' dollars purchase foods that reflect our values? And 2, what if institutions invested that money in buying foods that's rooted in health and equity? Well, at the Center for Good Food Purchasing program, we give institutions like public schools, city agencies, and hospitals the tools, resources, and framework to ensure that public food dollars are invested in a food system that supports good jobs, promotes regional local food production, supports high standards for animal welfare, protects our environment while promoting the health and well-being of our children. And we've spent years working with experts from leading farm and food organizations to define and operationalize the term good food. Our good food purchasing standards give institutions a roadmap toward the ideal food system, and like the LEED certification program that you're all very familiar with, we set the basic minimum for institutions to meet and then inspire them to perform better and better every year. So how does it all work? Well, it starts with our local coalitions, which are made up of representatives working from across the food systems on some of the most pressing food-related issues within their local communities. They bring the good food purchasing framework to their cities and agencies and build support for the program by bringing different stakeholders in their local community together. So these stakeholders can be school board, policymakers, city council members, nonprofit professionals, organizers, advocates, students, youth, farmers, business owners. They bring them together in a democratic exchange of ideas on how to bring their collective values to the forefront, using the program and policy as a tool. Once they've laid that foundation, we at the Center for Good Food Purchasing program would work with the institutions and the cities to help them better understand their purchases and give them the tools to make purchasing shifts. We do that by first working with them to establish supply chain transparency. And that means working with vendors to get the information that we need, verifying that information, and then talking through what we're going to need in the future and how we might work together. We then pass this information through our internal system to then evaluate how their purchases align with our values and framework. And finally, we share these findings with the institutions and give them the support and assistance, help them set goals and make shifts that align with their goals and our values. And throughout this process, each of our partners plays a very important role in ensuring transparency and accountability. The institutions, for example, when they enroll in the program, commit to incorporating our standards for good food and reporting requirements in their solicitations and contracts. They strive to make data about public procurement and its impact open to public scrutiny and hold annual hearings to report on their progress and the challenges that they face to the public. Our coalitions hold institutions and their vendors accountable by engaging in the public procurement decision-making process, attending town halls, public hearings, and participating in stakeholders' task force. We at the Center for Good Food Purchasing program is the third-party independent verifier of the institution's purchases, and we have a network of participants and partners who support coalitions and our institutions through peer learning groups and our community of purpose to share best practices and strategies to help advance initiatives on the ground and coordinate efforts on the national scale. So in response to COVID-19, what I have seen happening is Real Food Media, and you've heard from Tiffany Patton in, I think, a class in February. They put together a repository, essentially, of all of the resources that inform the public and our partners of all of the impact that COVID-19 has on the supply chain, on food services, on communities, farmers, and our institutions. And I've seen across the board local coalitions put together these webinars to have farmers talk to each other and inform each other of the practices that they have started to incorporate in their day-to-day to address COVID-19. Some of that is following the social distancing recommendation from the state, a lot of it is, being extra careful with disinfecting trucks and things that people might touch, like as simple as a pen, who, people use to sign in and out of their workplace. And we've seen a lot of food assistance programs stepping up to get farmers enough funds and channel a lot of their food supplies into food assistance programs like food banks and food pantries. So let's return to this program and how it all works. I want to walk you through an example of how this actually pans out in real life. And with that, I'm going to use Los Angeles Unified School District, who is one of our earlier adopters. In 2012, the Board of Education at LA Unified voted to adopt the Good Food Purchasing Program. In 2013, a key distributor for LA Unified and one of the biggest school food distributors in the Western region looked at their supply chain and started to develop a series of healthier bread options that are sourced with sustainable grains, sourced from a cooperative of local farmers. They started offering 45 million servings of these healthier options to 650,000 LA students and many more students in other school districts. In 2014, LAUSD committed to sourcing antibiotic-free chicken, making it one of the first school districts in the nation to do so. In 2015, Teamsters Joint Council 42 and Local 63, so these are two of the local coalition members in Los Angeles, they used language around the valued workforce principle in the policy to successfully negotiate a union contract with LAUSD distributor and effectively increasing wages for 320 warehouse workers and truckers by 40%. In 2017, the Board of Education voted not to renew a 5-year, $30 million chicken contract with Tyson, listening to the recommendations from the Food Chain Workers Alliance, the coalition lead in Los Angeles, because of Tyson's violations of the policy's labor, sustainability, and animal welfare principles. And as of 2018, LAUSD invests $17 million in the local food system and sources 94% of its chicken from sources that don't use antibiotics routinely. And that's one of the 43 different institutions that we work with across 18 different cities. Some of these institutions you might recognize: San Francisco Unified, Oakland Unified, Zuckerberg San Francisco General Hospital. And altogether, our program influences nearly $1 billion in annual purchasing power. And every year, participants in our program invest a significant amount of money into foods that align with our values. Imagine the impact that we could have if we were to shift the entire market for institutional food service contracts towards a values-based procurement model. As a student, it was very difficult for me to figure out how I can plug into this space. What I had was an interest in the nutritional aspect of the food system, and specifically nutrition transition. So what happens to the diet of populations in underdeveloped or developing countries as they transition into a more developed society. Well, that happened to my family and I when we moved from Vietnam to the US. We saw and experienced the impact of a highly processed diet on our health and well-being. And that's what drove me to this space. The more I learn about it through classes like edible education, the more I realize how intricate and interconnected everything in it is, which makes it extremely interesting as a topic, but also extremely difficult to explain to your immigrant parents how you've decided to pivot away from a career in the private sector, given your business background, to pursue this growing passion. That said, I am very happy with the decision that I made, and I've also come to realize that the private sector, you guys, the next generation of business leaders, have so much to offer the public sector, and vice versa. And it's really when people from these different sectors come together with open minds and open hearts that true transformation happens. And so I encourage you all with your different majors and perspectives and skill sets to set your biases aside if you have any, and reach across the aisle, maybe not literally in the next few months, to engage in conversations on how to creatively work together with people who have different backgrounds, majors, and skill sets and perspectives. Because as the next generation, we have so much to work through, and we're not going to be able to do it if we don't leverage our individual expertise and knowledge. 2 weeks ago, you heard from Karen Ross, the Secretary for Food and Agriculture for the state of California. And she said that it's going to take a lot of voices and coalition building and consensus building to bring our shared values forward and affect change. At the Center for Good Food Purchasing, we do that by bringing institutional purchasers, policymakers, organizers, community leaders, and people within the community together, and using the Good Food Purchasing framework as the means and policy as a tool to, and I quote, reboot the current industrial system. Because we share a belief, as many of you do, and certainly Sophie, after the experience of writing that book, that food production should be about keeping people and the planet healthy. And with that, I want to say thank you again for our panelists, for all of you guys who showed up today, and for Professor and Fiona and Sophie, and I truly look forward to the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Lam. That was exceptional, truly. And I'm enjoying the incredible number of topics that you touched on all throughout your presentation that have been real themes of this course. Systems intelligence, the multidisciplinary nature, the interconnectedness of all of this. I really also want to emphasize the great point that scale, right? I mean, each of us individually in the aggregate makes a difference, but institutional purchasing is a really fascinating, important lever in these systems, because as you've described, if you can convince these key decision makers to make even very small changes to their sourcing, or in my former case, the menu choices, you can make a huge impact on human environmental health. And that's really what's so tremendous about the accomplishments of you and your colleagues, which are such an inspiration. And I also want to just mention for everyone joining us that, the third-party certifications are not the magic bullet. There are no magic bullets in food systems transformation, but third-party certifiers like yours are really important sort of auditors because of so much misinformation, because a lot of times there's no sort of meat on the bone behind certain marketing terms. And I think of third-party certifiers often as sort of the referees of the transparency game. And so it's really exciting at this scale and at the institutional level that there is such a body in mind with such a well-formed and community-based framework that is in place. So thank you so much for sharing that. And just briefly, in a nutshell, tell us how you think about the difference between transparency and traceability as an eater and transparency and traceability as a company, or as a, not for you as a company, but for how those words are slightly different in their meanings.
Yeah, I mean, I loved how you kind of summed that all up. And from my 10-minute presentation, you did it in 2 minutes, and that's amazing. I think that, I mean, as a student, transparency was this term that you hear floating around everywhere, and there was such a heavy emphasis on the word transparency. And at that point, how I understood transparency was knowing where your food came from, trusting, being able to trust the claims that companies make on their food purchases. I mean, on the foods that they sell, and really relying on the system and trusting the system to communicate what's correct. when I took on this role and learned more about transparency from an institutional standpoint, I realized that there is a very huge role that auditors and third-party certifications play in ensuring transparency, because when you look at an item, it's not so clear if those claims are really correct. But I think that's the biggest change, I would say, from my perspective, when I went from being a student and an eater to working with institutions. And I think that when you work with institutions, there's an added layer of complexity in terms of how they look at transparency, because institutions don't go to the supermarket to buy foods, not like that. They buy foods through contracts and through bids. And so for them, transparency is detailing very clearly in their contracts that these are the requirements that they need to see in their foods. They have principles around sustainability, how much foods they expect to come from certain local farms, a local region, what percentage that would be, and whether their suppliers would meet these criteria under labor practices. So that they rely very much on their contracts and the fulfillment of those contracts to be able to communicate to the public that this is what they're serving. And I think that transparency, when you look at it from an institution standpoint, is also being able to communicate some of that information about their procurement out to the public and being held accountable. And that's really the job of the local coalitions and the public, and that's really where your voices as eaters come into place. Attending those town halls and public hearings, that's super important. Everybody plays a role in this transparency.
That's great. Yeah, I love the points on accountability there. I'm also really delighted that you mentioned Real Food Media's resource and all that you're seeing from your vantage point around coronavirus, because our next speaker is actually on the front lines of the restaurant industry. And I think so many of us are really looking at this with sort of bated breath and wondering, what can we do and how is this going to change the face of eating away from home as we know it? So with us, our next speaker is a dear colleague, Casey Gleason, who's Vice President of Food for Sweetgreen. And I got to know Casey through my work with Menus of Change, very much related to this topic that Lam just finished. And he's going to share a little bit about what he's seeing on the front lines. So Casey, if you can go ahead and unmute yourself and tell folks about transparency and traceability and coronavirus. I don't think we can hear you. Let's try again. Nope, can't hear you. Oh, try once more. Maybe it's the headphones. No. Bear with us.
I'm going to try to mute and unmute him in case that it's something to do with the host. Hold on. Try now. Mm-mm. Mm.
No luck. Stay with us, folks.
Do you want to try unplugging the headphones in case that's impacting? Oh, that might have helped.
Yay.
Yes, it worked.
All right. Casey Gleason, Vice President of Food for Sweetgreen, please take it away.
Oh no, it seems to not be working again.
We had you for a moment.
I think I don't know if you're able to unplug your headphones, but it might work if you just keep those unplugged.
You guys hear me now?
Yeah. Sorry about that.
You can hear me, and you can probably hear everything that's going on in my house. So that'll be fun for everyone.
Maybe it'll go viral. It'll be great.
Yeah. So thanks for having me. I just want to start with really 2 quick disclaimers. Clearly, we are in an unprecedented time, and if you are in this class, I'm assuming that means you, on some level, want to be either a food entrepreneur or in the food business, or are interested in a career in food. First thing that you need to know that is extremely relevant right now is that it's a business of people feeding other people, and you should never take that lightly. You have to have a ton of respect and care for the people that you are feeding, and a ton of respect and care for the people that you are working with on that mission to feed other people. So through that lens, I just want to say that I may need to jump off unexpectedly. It is the priority, the core priority of the people that are working at Sweetgreen right now is to take care of our team members. There's about 4,000 people that work at Sweetgreen, and our customers as well, taking care of our team members and our customers. That situation is ever changing. And honestly, there could be new developments at any time. And as Will said, the restaurant business is in a crucial moment, and it doesn't really take any time off. So if I jump off unexpectedly, there's a good reason, and that's disclaimer number 2, or number 1. Disclaimer number 2, I would say, is the reason why I still wanted to join this class and be involved in this discussion is really to learn. I think it's an important time, and really like to engage you guys. It's an important time as any time to engage the future people, the future food entrepreneurs, and the future people that are going to be in this business. And I really want to learn from you guys. I'm very interested in to hear what your thoughts on food are and what your thoughts are on solutions. I'm very, like I said, I really want to hear everyone's responses in the breakout session. So I'm excited about that. I was telling Sophie, I went to business school in 2007. I have an MBA and a master's in supply chain. It was very bizarre because I applied to go to business school at the end of 2006 or something, and by the time I got there, the country was in a recession. It was very bizarre. The recession started in the middle of the summer, and school started at the end of the summer. The program had a bunch of people that wanted to be investment bankers, and investment banks were kind of disappearing. There were also weird moments where the teachers were teaching principles, economic knowns and principles that the economy was kind of proving wrong while we were in class. And so it was a really great time to learn. And I think now is a great time to learn, because very much, most importantly, in this situation that's going on now, we're going to need solutions, and that everyone needs to be involved in developing solutions. So I'm excited for that part. 3 weeks ago, I would have had a great presentation about transparency. Sweetgreen is a very firm believer in transparency. I was excited to come and talk about it. And honestly, most of those things still hold true, but I really want to focus, out of respect for everything, to discussion on the here and now, and honestly be brief. Like I said, I'm here to listen, and am totally excited to participate and share my experience and perspective, but but not so much to teach. So that's disclaimer 2. I'm going to be brief. If you ever want to know anything about Sweetgreen or my experience or in the food business, you can email me. My name, whatever, my email is just casey.gleason@sweetgreen.com, and I'll be willing to share whatever you guys want to know. So I apologize in advance. That's how I want to approach my part here. For my part, I will speak just for a second on why transparency works for a food company. And I hope, especially if you are planning to start a business or want to make a career in the food world, that you understand why transparency works, and even how it shows up in our current situation. Conscious eating, which is what Sophie's book is about. I know that you guys talk a lot about it. Is really a consumer-driven movement. People really want to know more and more about where their food come, and they really want to support different kinds of food systems. Transparency is foundationally important in making the food system evolve. It allows really customers to guide where we want to take what is arguably the most important institution in our society, which is how we feed ourselves. During the early years at Sweetgreen, we made transparency a core pillar of our menu, and that there's really two reasons for that. One of them is because different ingredients and clearly different times have different considerations. I think the work that you will find in Sophie's book and in the stuff that Lam talked about, and that you can find a lot of information out there, there are a lot of different considerations and names for the way you would eat or source ingredients: local, organic, animal welfare standards, all of the things that Lam showed up, like how employees or how companies treat their employees, nutrition, all of those things. That it's hard to take one of those facets and say, this is the one that I want to stand behind. It's also, the food system is extraordinarily complicated. I think as you guys set up to go into that business or career or focus on it, the more, honestly, what I have found is the more you learn, the more you realize there is to know, and it is always more complicated than you think. So through that lens of understanding that all of these different ingredients have different considerations, we sort of landed on the best thing to do would be able to be transparent about every ingredient that you source and every menu decision that you make. I believe that we shared as part of the materials a couple examples of ingredients of emails that we've sent and different stories that we've told about an ingredient. We felt like in each ingredient, like I said, there are different trade-offs, but being able to tell the story and let a customer choose if they want to support that is something that is enabled through transparency and helps align the company and the customers. And I actually think even in the time like this, it still holds true as we set up to have the brainstorm and the discussion. As a lot of restaurant businesses and a lot of food companies are thinking about how to pivot, meaning like, how can we continue to feed people in this ever-changing environment? Being committed to transparency is what allows customers and companies stay aligned. If we are willing to, if in whatever decision that Sweetgreen wants to make in their pivot, being able to tell customers why and what are the forces that are being exerted on the food system and on the decisions that we're making, and if customers continue to choose to purchase the food, then we know that we have sort of aligned what we are doing with what customers are doing. The other reason why we settled on transparency as a main pillar of our business is because really transparency is a good guiding principle outside of, beyond food. It is clearly an important facet of the supply chain and in making good food decisions, but outside of food is a principle that you can connect to multiple other business decisions that don't directly relate to what goes on the menu, but how you show up for your employees, how you show up for your customers, all sorts of decisions that you make. The priority for Sweetgreen right now is basically to be able to safely connect people to food that will sustain them. And for us, looking at this crisis through that lens, being transparent about what is happening and what decisions we have to make allow us to show up the right way and contribute all of our efforts so that all of us can persevere through this crisis. So really, like I said, I have a lot of information about how Sweetgreen feels about transparency and what transparency has meant to us, but I would prefer today to be brief and really to talk about this current crisis and any questions that anyone has about how it is affecting our restaurant or restaurants in general, I can take afterwards.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Casey. And I really appreciate that you brought the mindset that is one of the core values of Haas, which is students always, and your interest in lifelong learning, I think, is so palpable and resonates so much with me and with I hope all those on the class here. And really your point that the more you learn, the more you realize you don't know and have left to learn is so true. And it's also what makes a career in food systems so exciting, because there is so much to learn, but it can also be daunting as it's evolving at such a rapid pace, as you mentioned. But I like the notion that transparency enables the industry to evolve. And I think that's really elegant. So thank you so much for that. In the interest of making sure that we do have time for that much anticipated breakout, I'm going to skip my question for you and go to our third and final panelists, who we're very honored to have. Raja Ramachandran is CEO and co-founder of Ripe.io, which is a technology platform, blockchain, that is sort of the how of transparency and traceability. And really, I'll let him speak to you about what it is that they do there and how he is really where his head is at with everything going on with coronavirus. So Raja?
Great. Thanks, Sophie. Can you all hear me?
Yes.
Okay, good. First of all, thank you for this, for the invite, and really honored to share the platform with Casey and Lamb and Professor Rosenzweig. It's been a long time since we spoke. Thank you for thinking about me on this one. I know that we've got limited time, so what I'll try to do is keep this relatively brief, and then hopefully you're able to see the screen properly. Give it 1 second. Are you seeing the kind of the two-stage screen, or I can switch the display? Is it showing properly?
We see the screen and the slides coming up on the left.
How's that?
That is the same.
Oh, really?
If you put PowerPoint into presentation mode by pushing that little screen in the lower right, it'll go full screen for your slides. But we can also see it the way it is.
It's not. There's no.
Maybe I'll just go like this if this is easier. Yeah.
That's fine.
Okay, great. We'll get to it. So, two quick things. My connection to college students. Number one, we've been conducting actually, and I'll get to this in the presentation, but we've been actually conducting a traceability project into a college in Heidelberg, and so we've been tracing a number of different ingredients into it, and the idea was to showcase transparency, but also trust. In other words, there are many assertions about the food, whether it's safe, where does it come from, does it have vectors of sustainability that map into things like Lamb was talking about at the good food purchasing. And unfortunately, like all of you, we certainly got the word about these hiatuses and the coronavirus, and so in the lieu of safety. So we actually had iPads at the food stations where they could actually take a hard look at, as they're taking in their salads or their soups, they could actually see where their food would come from. And so we're pretty excited to have that done starting this week. And like all of you, you're sitting at home, and I think they are too. So I definitely feel for what you're experiencing. And then my son is a Division I sports athlete, and he, along with thousands of others, are really, really angry. So at least he's not at a beach. He's actually practicing his sport. So in that sense, we'll get through. I think this will all go through. And let me walk you through a little bit of what we do. So at Ripe, what we've done is that we're trying to, it's not only transparency, but also trust and confidence in our food. There's just a lot of that worldwide. And so to be able to marry those two are really our objectives. And so how do you do that? We have a platform, and many of you may know something about blockchain, but it's a way in which you'll have a ledger system of which it allows farmers, packers, production companies, brands, restaurants, to all have a set of ledgers so that they can place information on it and ultimately share it. And so what we try to do is capture the origin, the journey, and ultimately the quality of that food. And that's really one of our key objectives in our mission, so that we can actually showcase a level of transparency that ultimately leads to trust. One of the key problems, and you may or may not have seen something along these lines, but in essence, the food system is incredibly disconnected. Now, granted, the food gets delivered generally safe and generally plentiful, but as a function, what we're seeing is that the strains on the system creates an enormous amount of waste, risk of things like recall and food safety, and even fraud. And so these fragmented systems really need to be put together in terms of shared data, so that you can actually get a better picture of the food that you get. It's just more than a label. It's really verifying some of these assertions, some of the things that Lam had talked about. And the idea is that as you deploy these ledgers, you actually connect the farmer, you connect the transporter, you connect the processor, or even direct to the buyer itself. And so in that sense, this is kind of who we serve, or these are the different elements of the food supply chain that are actually starting to work on our network, so that as we bring on, whether it's a sensor company that actually understands what's in your soil, certification companies like Lamb's, and restaurants like Sweetgreen, who we've done some work with, which we have been unbelievably proud to do and learn a lot with them. But also animal genomics companies that really understand, authenticity and growth patterns. And so these are all companies that sit on our system. And so what do? We actually do something what we call creating the food bundle. This is how we create a level of transparency about what's actually in that food. And so what this is that we look to digitize the entire journey of that food, from the origin all the way to all the different actors that have some part in, say, the generation of milk. And so, at a digital level, we capture information from the farm about your location, sensor information about the farm in terms of degree growing days, or like temperature and humidity, any certifications, harvest dates, and a whole series of things. Then as it goes to transport, the same thing. We pick up things like mileage and temperature sensors, lot ID numbers, and so on. And if you keep going down the food chain to big distribution centers, where they're heavily under strain today because of all these redirects and some stock outs and so on. And then ultimately to transportation, whether it's exported abroad or across the country, ultimately to you. And so all of these form a block. And that's ultimately what a blockchain is that you add this information, it's connected to the prior. And what ends up happening is everyone gets to see that one bit of information, whether it's an invoice, whether it's a harvest date piece, whether it's a transportation log. And so what ends up happening is that you get more clarity about what that food item is and its entire journey path. And ultimately that creates better efficiencies in the marketplace. In terms of, what do we do in terms of the kinds of cases that are actually being managed on our system, we've been working on things like origin, identifying where something comes from with a real level of veracity. Provenance and traceability, as I had mentioned, we were just doing this project in Ohio at a university. We've spent a lot of time actually with Sweetgreen, understanding quality and taste. They've really given us an enormous lesson on what are those factors that when you combine information from literally the soil, the seed, the growth patterns, the farming practices to transportation, if you take all these bits of information and you run it against a tomato, we're actually looking at how do you predict for that flavor, and how can they actually assess flavor depending on the soil types and the regions and the weather. And so it's been an extraordinary experience with them. We do a lot of work around sustainability with our customers. We've got some large entities like the Dairy Farmers of America or the National Pork Board, where they're finding that their customers are driving sustainability-based purchasing. So Chobani's may pay more for the milk provider if they can get assurance around animal welfare, environmental stewardship, labor inputs, community and food safety. And so those are indexes and data that we provide as what are called smart contracts, aligning the scorecard purchasing capability with an economic incentive tied back to ensuring that these types of activities around improving the food and food production process actually work. So these are some of the things that we work on today. And then a sample of what are like a product. So, for example, a supply chain manager or someone on the buyer side, what this shows are all the descriptors of, say, that tomato. What farm did it come from? If there's IoT devices or sensors, tell me a little bit about it. And then, of course, its path. And then we also did sort of a simple application for the dairy farmers where they wanted to show, how ultimately the customer could see something like this. You scan a QR code or a barcode, and you actually see everything about that milk. How long did it get there? how much carbon output was in the generation, and so on. And so in essence, what we're trying to do is create a single record of trust by incorporating and combining all this data that come from different ledgers, because each entity, the difference, I guess, versus the central one, is that each entity gets to place and own their own data and then share it based on the relationships that they have. And so in the long run, we hope to, have the system really grow so that it becomes a new type of network for food transparency, which leads to trust. And that's kind of the core of what we do.
Wow, thank you so much, Raja. I really think that's the clearest explanation of blockchain that I have seen to date. So thank you, and the visuals are so helpful. I'm also just really glad that you brought to light the point of food safety, which I think is probably more relevant maybe now than it has been for some time. I think that's an aspect of conscious eating, of transparency, that is, I believe, often taken for granted, and the availability of food, of course, in terms of logistics and how it gets from point A to point B and beyond throughout the system. So the supply chain sophistication that you shared is so relevant today, and also the great importance that the context in which we're seeking transparency and traceability is amid truth decay and the erosion of trust, and which types of information can we act upon. So that context is so critical. So thank you for touching on all of those. And I just think a huge hats off to our panel, because for those of you in the class, Will's really spoken to you about this notion of changing the food system. These three leaders are truly food systems change makers in action. This is what it looks like. And you see the interdependence and interconnected nature of these players within these ecosystems. With that, we're going to turn you loose to the breakout. So I'm going to share my screen and
Sophie, can I jump in for just a second too?
of course.
So one of the things we're really trying to do is foster more connectivity among the students. And for that to happen, we really need everyone to turn on their video that wants to participate now. We're going to break you into groups that are about 4 people. If you don't turn on your video or you bail out, the Zoom platform will put people in rooms by themselves. So what I'm going to do, we have 144 people left in the class right now. And I want to invite anyone who does not want to participate anymore, that's not prepared to put on their video for this part. I invite you to depart the class, so that when I push the magic button for the breakout room, everybody who's still here will be participating in the breakout. Again, if you're uncomfortable or you just aren't feeling up to it tonight, that's fine. But for those of you that really want the opportunity to, to be together in a small group, just 4 of you talking about what you're learning tonight, what you're experiencing, what ideas to support and help one another, this is the perfect time to do it. So I see that I'm going to give you a few more minutes, or maybe 1 more minute, to bid you adieu. Be sure you check B courses. The numbers are dwindling, but that's fine, because the people who will be left are going to go into breakout room. So now I'm going to say everybody who's here is going to stay, and I am going to turn it back over to Sophie in a few minutes. In a minute, we're down to about 100 people.
Hey, Will, it's Raj. I apologize. I might just go out of the meeting and come back in. For some reason, my camera's kind of stopped functioning.
That's
I'll be right back.
All right, I'm going to put 100 people into 20 rooms. And Sophie, do you want to say anything with a prompt before we do that?
Yes, so I will just quickly show you. So as we're all thinking about our pantries and just our food choices and just ability to feed ourselves, we wanted to really ask you this week, what new challenges are you facing with feeding yourself? And what are some solutions you're finding that you can share with others? So we're going to have 10 minutes till 7:45 for this breakout discussion for that prompt. And then we really invite you to share back using the raise your hand feature when we return. So there's the prompt. What new challenges are you facing with feeding yourself? And what are some solutions you're finding that you can share with others? Will, you can turn them loose.
Elaine,
Hello.
how did I end up at, how great.
I think I was having trouble with my microphone, so I changed my settings and it kicked me out of Zoom. But I was in a room with Fiona and Faye, who I know, both of
Okay.
them, which was fun, but I didn't get to talk to them.
I know, I didn't even know what room I was in. And then the people were like hidden. So here we are. How are you?
Here we are. I'm all right. How are you?
I read the big announcement the other day about your
Oh,
fund.
yeah.
I was sorry you didn't get mentioned. That kind of bummed me out.
I know. That's okay, though.
Yeah.
What'd you think?
Well, I mean, it's going to be very interesting timing right now, isn't it? To, you know, I mean, what an extraordinary moment to,
It's been wild. Yeah, it's interesting because we've been so focused on the snacks.
uh-huh.
But definitely there's a limit to how much we can move forward with travel lockdown.
Yeah.
And then also for compostable packaging, we needed to do shelf life testing for basically 6 months plus
Right.
2 months lead time. So we've been talking about maybe pushing out our launch a little bit.
Hey, Raja, that was a great presentation. Thank you.
Oh, thanks, Professor.
It's so
Appreciate
cool
it.
to see how far you've come since I sat down with you last a couple years ago. So
Yeah, and that was a brief glimpse of it. It's
Yeah.
a lot more than that. So
no,
it's
I
great.
know.
Thanks. Good to
I've
see you.
been following you from afar, but I was really happy that you came to class. So thank you.
Yes.
This is Elaine Sue is right in our room as well. And Elaine just graduated last year, and she's just started a new company focused on regeneratively sourced and formulated snack foods. So she was just bringing me up to speed.
Awesome.
They just sort of announced their financing. We were talking about the
Timing.
the challenges.
Yeah. Hi, Raja. I saw you speak a couple of years ago, I think, when you came to Haas.
Oh, that's right. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think we spoke for a little bit afterwards. So really
did.
appreciated seeing you again today.
Oh, terrific. Well, it's good to see you.
Yeah. Yeah, it's been interesting because we're launching a snack cracker, and we're tracing all the ingredients up the supply chain through, you know, more traditional suppliers, because we're buying in small volumes, and so we don't really have the wherewithal to contract for large quantities and kind of the information that comes with it. And so many of them don't have any information on any of the farming practices, as I'm sure you know. And now doesn't seem like an appropriate time to push too hard on that.
No, I get it. I mean, we have a, we're actually in the process of building out a very streamlined and kind of a simple version of what we do for small brands like yourselves.
Oh, interesting.
And so it's like we have a cohort. So if you're willing to be a bit of a guinea pig, I mean, right now I know you've got probably bigger things on your mind, but if you're willing to be a bit of a guinea pig, we're literally building product with small companies like yourselves. We have a company called Burlap and Barrel, a couple of entrepreneurs that source, really interesting spices and so on from all over the world. I mean, they've even gone to the Afghan front lines in the war to pick up certain types of herbs and spices. And so we've got another one who's the former founder of Mighty Leaf Teas. She's creating a new beverage brand. And so, we're looking at like
Jill,
that problem
Jill?
you just said. Yes, Jill. Yeah. And so, through them, we're seeing exactly what you just described. And we're trying to make sure that we have a product that tells you where your stuff is at any point in time. That's kind of the first version. And then secondly, how is it that you'll have enough of your supply to assemble what you need against an invoice? So we can talk about it later. I certainly don't want to hog the session, but please call me.
No, this
I
is
will.
a perfect use of this. I mean,
I think we would love to be guinea pigs. Because one of the things we're doing, for example, is we're actually working with our wheat supplier to measure the soil organic carbon down to 1 meter, which, is an investment for us. And it's with them, it's simple because we're only having 1 or 2 suppliers that we're doing that with. But we can only do that with kind of our main suppliers and not all of our suppliers.
Are you using a sensor for that, for the data collection?
No, I think we're going to use humans.
So we, with Sweetgreen, actually, we used 2 sensor companies that collected all of the soil information. There's a group called Teralytic and another one called Picno. And these are 3 feet probes that, that go into the ground. The Teralytic actually has an unbelievable array of data. It captures NPK, but also a whole host of chemical analysis, temperature, if it's loam, et cetera. And then Picno is a little bit more just focused on temperature, characteristics. But, if you're, the more we speak, let me know, because I can point you in that direction. I know it's going to be a little on the expensive side, but, we've learned a lot from how do you manage IoT. It's not pretty. There's a great promise for sensors and what they play a part in, but there's just a lot of these companies don't know how to support it. So your manual process, I'm sure will yield good results for you. But there is technology that actually does a lot, and through it, we actually started doing flavor predictions with Sweetgreen. So it's really an amazing project that we've done. It's cool.
One of the needs that has presented itself just over the last few days that I don't think anybody ever thought about would be sort of inventory access and availability at a retail store. It's been pretty extraordinary, the sellout. Do you guys have any estimation of when the supply chain rebounds from this sort of massive stocking up that people have done? My daughter's been sending me pictures of the Whole Foods near her in Chicago, and it hasn't rebounded. I mean, the shelves are just completely empty. And now today they instituted finally a maximum. It's about time. I mean, it's like you can only buy 4 frozen pizzas at a time, but they were out of everything by the time she went back today. You guys have any predictions on that, or?
Well, it's interesting because like one of our customers is the Gordon Food Service. So they provide not only to college, university, hospitals, but grocery stores and they restaurants. And hearing them, like one of their challenges right now is there's a lot of redirects. So that because of the shock of demand for things like middle of the aisle, from toilet paper and cleaning goods all the way to pastas and canned soups and canned goods and boxed crafts and so on, all those kind of things. Because we've had a long-term decline in that trend of middle of the grocery store purchases to fresh, and to have this kind of hit. It's ironic that that's the first place that everybody goes to stock up, and that and frozen, vegetables. So I can't say that the folks at Gordon have, some kind of forecast on when they rebound, but, in terms of the food supply chain itself, it's pretty robust, whether it's large scale food producers like Dole or, Del Monte or whomever, to local food management. I think that, what we've seen in even local is that, they have a fairly predictable sense, of it, and they've got their local customers that buy. And so right now, in terms of food supply, I think it's reasonable, but in terms of restocking, like big stores, I think that's going to take time because Amazon has such a big impact on online delivery that it's sucking up all of this excess inventory. But, in terms of food, I think you'll start to see that, come through. In the end, it really is going to come down to, what the federal policy will be on things like what we've done here in San Francisco. Will we actually have a Marshall Plan? Will we all go on lockdown? That's going to dictate, what's going to happen with food supply too.
That's helpful. I'm going to sign off because I'm going to have to go back to navigating the Zoom thing here and put us back into the main group. So forgive me if I make our room disappear temporarily.
Okay.
I'm still not entirely sure how all of this works, but really appreciate you, Raja, being there. And it's nice of you, Elaine, to join the class too. It's always good to see you.
My pleasure.
Email me, Elaine, raja@ripe.io.
I will definitely do that.
Awesome. Thanks again.
Yeah. Okay, so we've got 23 seconds.
Oh, it gives you a little warning to say goodbye to the people in your room.
Yeah, on the other side, yeah.
Yeah. That's
Good.
really cool.
Yeah.
It's interesting because I think a lot of people purchase their food through restaurants. And so it seems like there's enough food in the system, but wholesalers who sell to restaurants actually now don't have people to sell to because they're not set up to sell to consumers. And that's kind of the work that a lot of people know.
Okay, are we back from the breakout room now? If we are, nod your head. Thank you, Fiona. I really appreciate that. How did that go? Do you want to chat a little bit? Was it better than, did we improve over last week? I guess that's the first question. Yes?
Yeah, I had a great chat in my session. I don't know if anyone else wants to share. Looks like someone in the chat box said it was great.
Good. I'd love to get feedback. Okay, good. Look, somebody raised their hand.
Oh, fun.
You didn't have to ask. Great.
Sophie, I'll turn it back over to you to moderate. So you can call on people by clicking on the hand, I think.
Let's see. I'm not even seeing the hand actually.
Okay, well, I just clicked on it. Castillo. Where's Castillo?
Hi, everyone. Can you hear me?
Yeah,
Yes.
there we go.
So, my name is Andrea Castillo. It's just my last
Oh,
name.
okay, Andrea.
We had a great session because there were 3 of us, and none of us were actually students. We are all members of the community, and we were just so appreciative that this class has been open to the public and that we can join and participate alongside with you. It's been a great class. And I was with Lynn, who has a ranch out in Idaho, and with John, who has a farm by Mount Diablo. And so it was just really fun to get to talk to people in this community. And we didn't really complete the assignment, but we got to know each other. So I just wanted to say how great that was.
Good. Well, thank you for joining the class. That's really wonderful. Does anybody else want to share their experience? You can raise your hand. Don't be shy. I can't figure out how to raise my hand, but I want to. Okay, Miranda Lee.
I can unmute you, Miranda. Let's see.
Hi.
Okay, Miranda, you should be able to talk now. There you go.
Awesome. Thank you. So I had a really great time in my breakout session. I thought it was really cool because there is a grad student and then also a community member and then another undergrad as well as me. And so I got to hear sort of like very different perspectives on the situation, because I think like being at different places in your life, like I'm at home right now, I flew home and so I feel really lucky, but like so I'm not even in the Bay Area, but like other people are, and it's cool to hear their experiences in that.
Awesome. Thank you for sharing.
Thank you for sharing. Who else can share?
Barb raised hands.
How do you raise the hand? You go to
Lower hand. Helen and Leah? I don't know how to call it. Sorry.
Okay, Helen, do you want to speak? I think you're unmuted now. Hi, Helen.
Hey, thank you for letting me speak. So, my group shared our discussion very a lot on just basically cooking at home. Yeah, and so there are issues with getting access to food in the supermarkets, but also like there's no issue about food insecurity, but we talked about cooking, and something that I came up with that they kind of identify with was just like how to actually have the energy to be able to be more curious and be trace the food as a more conscious eater, because like the life has been very tough and overwhelming. There are a lot of other things going on, but I think a good way to get started is just to, like Will has been saying, stay grounded. And my way of doing that is to simply start loving food and loving cooking, and getting that more intimate interactions with the food ingredients, because in that process we are more likely to be conscious about the nuances, at least among the food's flavors, and just by just do this more intimate interaction, will we be likely get more curious.
Thank you, Helen.
Yeah.
That's really wonderful. I really appreciate you contributing that. There's a few more people that have raised their hands. Why don't you take it from there, Fiona, because I think you can.
Yeah, so Hannah, I'm going to unmute you now.
Maybe we've only got about 5-6 minutes left, so let's try to be concise and use the time wisely, but I love hearing from everyone. So go ahead, Hannah.
Yeah, thank you. Actually, couple of people in my group, they didn't speak, but I had a great conversation with Julie, who is instructor of edible education food yard from LA. So she was a member of the public. So I share a situation what's happening here in the Bay Area, and also we share that we order our food online. So we're trying to stay grounded at home, and she used imperfect produce delivery, and also from Amazon, like Amazon delivery. It's very difficult to order from Amazon right now because they have just not so many windows open. So she was able to sign up for one and get it delivered. So it was good for her. And yeah, we also tried Farm Fresh to you, so it seems still be working good. And also, just to share with maybe some students here, like there was like some food pantry at school right now. If someone needs any food, I think it's like open, and they through the email they share hours when they open as well. So they have some fresh produce and canned food.
Really helpful resources. Thank you so much.
Do we want to do one more share?
Sure, let's do that.
Okay, so I'm gonna unmute Kalia. Did I say your name?
Hey everyone, I'm Kalia. I'm a sophomore at Cal. I had a really nice conversation with Hannah and Natasha, two other students. One thing I think is that staying home is a wonderful privilege, and honestly, if you can work from home, we should be doing it more after the coronavirus crisis passes. It's helping a lot with pollution. Hannah Johansson, my partner in this breakout session, was talking about how the Venice canals have cleared. I read this morning China pollution is way down. So I think that like maybe 2 days a week at home, if you can in the future, could be really beneficial to reduce emissions.
Thank you for making that, that point and that connection. I want to just say that we're getting even better at these experiences here. And I want to thank Sophie and Lam and Casey and Raja for their contributions. We have a week off next week. I hope everybody can replenish themselves, get some extra rest, relax. And then when we come back on April 1st, we've got another exciting class really about culinary literacy and culinary medicine. We've got people from the worlds of medicine, public health, and the culinary world. And I communicated with all of them today, and they're actually going to tee up and do some more cooking demos live on Zoom for you, things that you can prepare simply at home while you're sheltering in place during this very strange, surreal time. But Sophie, why don't you, do you want to say anything in closing? I just want to really wish you well on your book tour and with your book, and thank you again for coming.
Thank you so much for the opportunity, and thank you again to our absolutely incredibly inspiring panelists, and really to each one of you for taking the time. I just would say two things. One is that I found this an incredible way to connect with people during a time when we are all really retreating inward, and it is incredibly exciting to your point, Kalia, about the powers of technology and what might be some silver linings about how this could shift things for the future. I'm really looking for silver linings every day in this experience, and kind of what are some of those outcomes. One of them may very well be related to that next class of culinary literacy, that if we're preparing food directly and a sort of necessity, perhaps that can really solve something that many organizations have actually been trying to address for years, which is that gap in kind of self-efficacy to prepare food for yourself in a way that again aligns with your values, but also tastes really good, and it's something that is full of cultural discovery and diversity throughout your lifetime as a conscious eater. So looking for those silver linings, a great next course coming up, and I will look forward to hopefully joining you as a community member and continuing to find comfort and solutions from each one of you. So stay well. Thank you for the opportunity. And as Will said, take good care during that downtime next week.
Thank you all. We'll see you on April 1st.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Good night.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.